December 22, 1944, 1447 SS Group N. Stood by a map in his command post in and smiled, his 6th SS Panzer Army had advanced 60 deep into American defenses. In front of him lay reports of panic among enemy troops of entire divisions retreating in disorder. Americans are not soldiers, he told his chief of staff, they are merchants playing at war. When it comes to real battle they run, 800 to the south in the town of Nancy. General George looked at the same map, but his face showed naught but cold fury. His Third Army was preparing for the most incredible maneuver in modern military history. In 48 hours, told his commanders, we will pivot the entire Army 90 and strike a blow the Germans will never forget. 4 days later, was no longer smiling. His invincible SS Army was encircled, and the Americans he had so despised were writing new rules of Blitzkrieg. This is the story of how mockery turned into nightmare and how's greatest gamble became greatest triumph. On December 16, 1944, at 5:30 a.m., the silence of the forests was shattered by the thunder of 1,000 guns. Operation Mr. Rain. Last desperate attempt to change the course of the war had begun. 200,000 German soldiers, 600 tanks, 1,900 guns crashed down on an 80 front defended by just 4 American divisions. It was the largest German offensive on the Western Front since 1940, had chosen for his final strike the same place where 4 years earlier his armies had broken through to the Channel and crushed the French. Difficult terrain with dense forests and narrow roads seemed the perfect place for a surprise attack. The American command considered this sector quiet and stationed its least experienced units here. The 106th Infantry Division had arrived at the front only 2 weeks earlier. The 28th Infantry Division was recovering from heavy fighting in the forest. The first hours of the offensive seemed brilliant for the Germans. American units caught off guard retreated in panic. Entire battalions surrendered. On the first day, the Germans advanced 20. In Berlin, euphoria reigned. Prepared proclamation of a second Dunkirk. Generals who had been retreating for months suddenly believed in the possibility of victory, but in the Allied headquarters at Versailles, the atmosphere was entirely different. General Eisenhower realized the Germans had bet everything they had left. This was not a tactical diversion, it was a strategic gamble that could either prolong the war by a year or end it forever, and so Eisenhower made the boldest decision of his career. He called the plan for Operation Rain was born in the German headquarters in the fall of 1944, out of desperation and unrealistic hopes. Squeezed between the advancing Red Army in the east and the Allies in the west, sought a way to radically change the situation. On September 16, 1944, the summoned Colonel General Alfred Jodl and announced a plan that shocked even this seasoned staff officer. German forces were to break through cross the Meuse River, capture Antwerp, and split the Allied armies. Half if we manage to take Antwerp, said, tracing his finger across the map. The British and Americans will be divided. They'll have to make a separate peace with us, and then we can throw everything against them. The plan looked grandiose on paper. 3 armies, the 5th and 6th SS Panzer armies plus the 7th Army, were to cover 152 in just 4 days. For this concentrated the Reich's last strategic reserves, 12 Panzer divisions, including the most elite SS units, but Jodl and other generals saw obvious problems. The Germans lacked fuel. Each Panzer division had ammunition and supplies for only 150. They could field at most 800 aircraft against 4,000 Allied, and most importantly, the Americans were no longer the inexperienced defeated at in 1943. Field Marshal Jur, nominal commander of the Western Front, called the operation a grand fantasy. Field Marshal Walter, who had to command the offensive directly, asked to scale it down but was adamant. This operation is our last chance, he said. Either we break the Allies now or we lose the war entirely. Preparation for the operation proceeded in strict secrecy. The code name Watch, although it was intended to create the impression that the Germans were preparing for defense, not attack. Troop movements took place only at night. Radio communication was forbidden. Officers swore oaths of silence under threat of execution. By December 15th, the Germans had concentrated 200,000 men, 600 tanks and assault guns, 1,900 artillery pieces in the. It was the largest concentration of German forces on the Western Front since the Normandy invasion. Facing them, the Americans had only 83,000 soldiers in 4 divisions. U.S. command considered the too difficult for large-scale operations. General Troy H. 8th Corps held the sector with green and battered units. German officer Troy von Freit described the mood in American trenches before the attack. The Yanks played cards, listened to jazz on the radio, and dreamed of Christmas at home. They had no idea what awaited them. On December 16, 1944, at 5:30, German artillery opened the heaviest barrage on the Western Front since D-Day. 1,900 guns simultaneously rained fire on American positions along an 80 front. Private James of the 99th Infantry Division later recalled, "I'd been in the infantry for 2 years, but I had never seen such hell. The ground jumped under our feet, trees fell like matchsticks. It felt like the world was ending, but the artillery preparation lasted only 90 minutes. The Germans could not afford to expend more ammunition. They simply didn't have the reserves. At 700, the infantry assault began, supported by tanks. The first blows fell on the 14th Cavalry Group in the 106th Infantry Division. These units were the least experienced in General Troy's 8th Corps. The 106th had arrived at the front only on December 11th and had not yet fully prepared positions. The German offensive followed the classic blitzkrieg pattern. Tanks infiltrated weak spots in the defense while infantry mopped up strong points left behind. The heaviest blows came from the 1st SS Panzer Division, Lee Standard on the northern flank, and the 12th SS Panzer Division in the center. By noon, the situation for the Americans was critical. 2 regimental combat teams of the 106th Division, the 422nd and 423rd Infantry Regiments were encircled near the village of, it was the largest American pocket since Bastogne. Colonel George, commander of the 422nd, tried to break out, but German tanks already controlled all the roads. At 16:30, he received an order from division command: hold positions at all costs. Help is on the way, but no help came. General Jones, commander of the 106th, had lost contact with half his units. His headquarters in V turned into chaos. Telephones rang constantly. Couriers rushed in with conflicting reports, and the situation map became a mosaic of red blotches. Meanwhile, German panzer units pushed deeper into American defenses. The battle group of SS Piper of the 1st SS Panzer Division advanced 25 and seized the village of. Here occurred the first major tragedy of the battle. An American column, medics and service troops, ran into Piper's tanks near 84 Americans surrendered, but Piper's S executed the prisoners afield. This event, remembered as the massacre, became a symbol of the brutality of this battle. By the end of the day, the Germans had advanced 20 along the front. In American headquarters, confusion reigned. General Courtney, commander of the 1st Army, for the first time in the war, lost control of the situation. December the 17th was the darkest day for American forces in the Battle of the German offensive spread like an oil stain, engulfing more and more territory. By noon, it became clear this was not a local diversion but a full-scale offensive. At a key transport hub, the American defense was cracking. Major General Robert, commander of the 7th Armored Division, received orders to move immediately to aid encircled units, but his division was scattered along a 30 front. Need at least 12 hours to concentrate my forces, reported by radio, but I fear that in 12 hours there will be no one left to save. Indeed, the situation of the 422nd and 423rd Regiments was becoming hopeless. Surrounded in the forests near, the American soldiers were starving and freezing. The Germans tightened the ring methodically, using artillery and mortars. Private Elmer Clerk of the 423rd Regiment wrote in his diary, 3rd day in encirclement, no food, no ammunition. We can't evacuate the wounded. The Germans shouted us to surrender, promise good treatment. The boys are starting to crack. On December 19th, the resistance of the 422nd and 423rd Regiments ended. 7,000 American soldiers surrendered, the largest capitulation of U.S. forces in Europe. German propagandists immediately used the event to boost their troops' morale, but not all American units panicked. In the town of a vital road junction, the 101st Airborne Division prepared for siege. These paratroopers, veterans of Normandy and Operation Market Garden, had no intention of surrendering without a fight. Brigadier General, acting commander of the division, received a German ultimatum: honor demands that you surrender to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Reply became legendary. Nuts. Meanwhile, German panzer divisions pressed forward. Piper's battle group reached the village of, only 10 from a massive American fuel depot at Spa. Had the SS captured it, they would have had enough fuel to reach the Meuse, but here the Germans met American ingenuity. Lieutenant Colonel David's engineer company rigged every bridge on Piper's route with explosives. When German tanks approached, the Americans blew up the bridge over the river. Piper was trapped, ahead a destroyed bridge in American anti-tank guns, behind other U.S. units already launching counterattacks. Ammunition and fuel were running out. We are in a position where every hour may be our last, Piper noted in his war diary. The Americans are proving much tougher opponents than we expected. By day end, it was clear the German advance was losing momentum. Heroic resistance by isolated American garrisons, destroyed bridges, and fuel shortages were all slowing the German push. On December 19, 1944, at 10:30 a.m., the phone rang in the 3rd Army headquarters in Nancy. General George picked up and heard the voice of the Supreme Commander. "George, the situation in the is critical. I need your army." Eisenhower explained succinctly. The Germans had broken through 62 U.S. divisions were destroyed, was under siege. "How long will it take you to turn your army north?" he asked. 48 hours, replied without hesitation. "Give me 48 hours and I'll attack." Eisenhower paused. What was proposing seemed impossible. The 3rd Army was deployed eastward, preparing to cross the Saar River. Now it had to pivot 90 and march 150 north in the middle of winter on icy roads. Any other general would have asked for a week to regroup, promised 48 hours. "All right," Eisenhower said. "Do it," hung up the receiver and turned to his staff. Chief of Staff Major General shook his head at the map. "Boss, it's impossible. We've got 133,000 men, 800 tanks, 500 guns. How can we move them in 2 days?" Smiled. "You haven't yet seen what a real army can do. You're about to." For the next 2 hours, the 3rd Army headquarters buzzed with feverish activity. Planning officers drew up routes for hundreds of columns. Communications officers organized radio nets. Supply officers calculated fuel and ammunition needs. At 1 p.m., gathered his division commanders. He said, "We face the toughest operation of the war. We must turn the entire army north and strike the Germans in 48 hours. Who thinks this is impossible?" No one raised a hand. Commanders of the 3rd Army knew their old blood and guts. When made a promise, he kept it. Excellent. Continued, the 4th Armored Division moves to the 26th Infantry to Luxembourg, the 80th Infantry to Merch. The march begins today at 1800. Questions? Major General Commander of the 4th Armored raised his hand. "Sir, what about supplies? We'll be cutting ourselves off from bases." "Supplies will come," replied firmly. "I've arranged with the French. They're giving us all their depots, plus Army aviation will drop ammo from the air." At 1800's 3rd Army began the fastest redeployment in modern military history. Across the frozen roads of France and Luxembourg moved hundreds of columns of tanks, guns, and trucks. 133,000 soldiers marched toward destiny. The night of December 20th was hellish. For soldiers, temperatures dropped to sea and the roads became ice rinks. Hundreds of columns moved in darkness, guided only by blackout headlights. Sergeant Mike of the 4th Armored Division later wrote to his wife, "We marched all night on frozen roads. Tanks skidded, trucks slid into ditches, but nobody stopped." Said 48 hours, so 48 hours it will be. The logistical challenge was staggering. The 3rd Army had 15,000 vehicles from tanks to field kitchens. All had to be moved 150 without losing combat effectiveness. Colonel Walter, head of the Army Movement Section, devised a detailed plan. Roads were divided into corridors. Armored divisions took the main highways, infantry the secondary roads, artillery and support units the back roads. Each column had a precise schedule. Tanks 25 on highways, 15 on dirt roads. Trucked infantry 30-hour, artillery on tractors 20, stops only for refueling and maintenance. French directed traffic at intersections. American military police controlled the main routes. Engineer battalions cleared snow and spread sand on icy stretches, but the greatest challenge was concealment. German air reconnaissance must not discover the 3rd Army's redeployment, so movement took place only at night with columns hiding in forests by day. On December 20th at 1400, the first units of the 4th Armored Division reached the area of only 30 from. It was fantastically fast, 150 in 20 hours. Major General immediately set up his command post and radioed, "Sir, the vanguard is in place. Ready for battle." "Excellent," you replied. "Now show the Germans what American speed really means." Meanwhile, the 26th Infantry Division of General reached positions near Luxembourg City. The 80th Infantry Division of General Horace Bride assembled in the MCH area in 36 hours. Had moved 133,000 men and 15,000 vehicles. It was the fastest strategic redeployment of an army in all of World War II. German command had no idea that an entire army was approaching from the south, but had no intention of stopping. On December 21st at 600 he gave the order, "We attack today, no artillery. Preparation, no probing attacks, just forward and tear their guts out." Third Army prepared for the boldest counterattack in its history. On December 22, 1944 at 600 a.m. The silence of this morning was broken by the roar of tank engines. 4th Armored Division of the Third Army launched a counterattack from the south against German positions. Major General deployed his division in classic formation, tank battalions in front, motorized infantry on half-tracks behind them. Self-propelled artillery on the flanks, 160 Sherman tanks and 80 self-propelled guns pushed northward. The Germans were caught completely. SS Group, who only yesterday had mocked the American shopkeepers, now frantically tried to shift reserves to meet the new threat. Where did they get an entire army? He shouted over the radio to his chief of staff. 3 days ago they were running in panic and now they're attacking with 3 divisions at once. The first clash took place near the village of the German 5th Parachute Regiment had dug in among stone houses and prepared to repel a frontal assault, but the Americans attacked differently than the Jagger expected. Instead of striking head-on, Sherman tanks split into small groups and encircled the village from 3 directions. Simultaneously, self-propelled M7 Priest howitzers fired direct rounds into buildings while infantry advanced under cover of smoke screens. Within 2 hours was liberated. German losses 340 killed and wounded, 180 captured. American losses 23 killed and 67 wounded. The casualty ratio spoke for itself, but the greatest effect was psychological. German soldiers who only yesterday had felt like victors suddenly realized they were the ones being attacked, and attacked so quickly and decisively that resistance seemed futile. SS of the 12th SS Panzer Division wrote in his diary, "The Americans attack like their tanks are everywhere, in front, on the flanks, behind. It seems they have endless reserves. We have only what remains after 5 days of assault." By noon, the 4th Armored Division had advanced 8 and reached the approaches 2. Here the Americans faced heavy resistance. The Germans rushed in the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division and the 5th Parachute Division. The fiercest battle of the counterattack began. German Panthers and Tigers clashed with American Shermans in open terrain. Technically, the German tanks were superior, but the Americans had the advantage in numbers and, most importantly, logistics. When a German tank was knocked out, its crew often had nowhere to retreat. When an American Sherman was lost, another rolled forward within an hour. Patton's supplies of fuel and ammunition seemed inexhaustible. Captain James, a tank company commander, recalled, "We lost 12 tanks in one day, but by evening we received 15 replacements. The Germans lost 8 and got none. The arithmetic of war was on our side." By the end of December 22nd, the German ring around was pierced from the south. The 4th Armored Division established a narrow corridor to the besieged stronghold. The 101st Airborne Division was saved. December 23rd brought a change in the weather that completely shifted the balance of power. The fog lifted, the sky cleared, and American air power could finally enter the battle. At 8:30, the first P-47 Thunderbolts appeared over the battlefield. Each heavy fighter bomber carried 10 HVAR rockets and 500 bombs. German armored columns stood out as easy targets against the snow-covered fields. Major Robert S. Johnson, ace of the 56th Fighter Group, led the first strike. We saw the perfect picture beneath us. German tanks and trucks strung out along the road, for it was like a shooting gallery. On the first day of air operations, the Germans lost 89 tanks and assault guns, plus over 200 vehicles and tractors. It was a blow from which the Panzer divisions never recovered, but on the ground the fighting only intensified. Encouraged by the success at order, the offensive expanded. The 26th Infantry Division attacked toward Wiltz while the 80th Infantry pushed on. The fiercest battle erupted for the town of. This small Luxembourgish town became the key to the entire German position in the southern sector of the Bulge. Whoever held controlled the main communications of the German force. Germans pulled in the 352nd Infantry Division and remnants of the 276th Infantry Division. Defense was commanded by experienced Colonel. Veteran of the Eastern Front, "This town is the key to our southern flank," told his men. "If the Americans take it, the whole 7th Army risks encirclement." The attack on was led by Colonel Harry of the 80th Infantry Division. His plan was simple but effective: diversionary attacks from the west and east with the main strike from the north where the Germans least expected it. The battle began at 500 on December 24th. American 105 shelled German positions for an hour, after which 3 infantry battalions advanced with tank support. The Germans resisted desperately. Every house became a fortress, every street defensive line. The Americans fought house by house, room by room. Sergeant Frank of the 317th Infantry Regiment recalled, "It was like hell. The Germans sat in cellars with machine guns and panzer. Any room could be your last, but we pushed forward because we knew was behind us." By the end of the day, the Americans held half the town. The Germans back to the center and entrenched themselves in a 14th-century stone church. From there they continued firing on U.S. troops, called for reinforcements. A battery of 155 howitzers, 2 direct hits reduced the ancient church to rubble. German resistance collapsed. On Christmas Day, December 25th, was fully liberated. The southern flank of the German Bulge began to crumble. December 25th, 1944 entered history as the Christmas miracle of 3rd Army. On the day when all of Christian Europe celebrated the birth of Christ, and American soldiers received the best gift, the chance to win. At 600 a.m. personally arrived at the forward command post of the 4th Armored Division near. He wanted to assess the situation himself and plan the next phase of the counterattack. He told his commanders, "The Germans have given us the best Christmas present. They poured out of their fortifications and let themselves be destroyed in the open field. Now it's our turn to hand out gifts." The situation truly favored the Americans. In 4 days of counterattacks, the 3rd Army had advanced 20, liberated and captured key towns. Most importantly, the German initiative was gone for good. SS Group, who a week earlier had dreamed of a second Dunkirk, now feverishly looked for ways to save his divisions from destruction. His 6th SS Panzer Army had lost half its tanks and a third of its manpower. "The Americans no longer fight the way they used to," he reported to. "They've become faster, bolder, more ruthless. Their Patton has outplayed us all." Indeed's tactics were radically different from the traditional American approach. Instead of slow preparation and cautious advances, he chose speed and aggression. His tanks struck where least expected. His infantry never paused to consolidate lines. "Speed is everything," repeated. "While the Germans think we act, while they regroup we attack. They're playing at war, we're winning it." On December 26th, the 3rd Army launched a new stage of the offensive. The goal was no longer just to relieve, but to encircle and annihilate the entire southern part of the German Bulge. The 4th Armored Division struck northeast, aiming to cut the road. The 26th Infantry Division advanced on Wiltz. The 80th Infantry cleared the remaining German resistance in Luxembourg. The fiercest fighting erupted over the village of, turned into a strong point by the Germans. The 15th Panzer Grenadier Division had turned every farmhouse into a bunker, every barn into a firing position. But the Americans found an unorthodox solution. Instead of a frontal assault, commander of the 37th Tank Battalion ordered his Shermans to attack at night with headlights on. "The Germans expect tanks to attack in daylight," explained. "A night assault with lights will stun them." The gamble worked brilliantly. German anti-tank gunners, blinded by tank beams, couldn't aim. Infantry panicked and abandoned positions. Within 3 hours, CBRE was captured. By the end of December, the German Bulge had turned into a bag. From 3 sides, it was being squeezed by American and British forces. Retreat routes were cut off by artillery and aircraft. On December 27th, confusion bordering on panic reigned in German headquarters. What had seemed a triumphant advance a week earlier was now a catastrophe. Field Marshal Walter Model, commander of Army Group B, convened an emergency meeting at his headquarters in. Reports from division commanders painted a picture. Colonel Otto, commander of the 150th Panzer Brigade: "My unit has lost 60% of its equipment. The Americans attack so fast we can't maneuver." Major General of the 5th Parachute Division: "My division is scattered. Regiments have no contact with each other. American artillery fires around the clock." Lieutenant General Fritz of Panzer Lehr Division: "I have 18 tanks left out of 80, fuel for 1 day, ammunition for half a day." Model listened with a stony face. The virtuose tactician who had held back the Red Army for 2 years now stood powerless before the American onslaught. The problem isn't that the Americans got better, he told his chief of staff. The problem is that we got worse, our soldiers are exhausted, our equipment worn, and we have no reserves. Indeed, the divisions taking part in the offensive were shadows of this past glory. The 12th SS Panzer Division was manned by boys of 16 to 17. The 276th Infantry Division was filled with 40 to 50-year-old reservists. Even the elite 1st SS Panzer Division suffered from a shortage of experienced officers. Meanwhile, prepared the final blow. On December 28, he summoned his corps commanders and unveiled Operation Thunderbolt. He said, "The Germans stuck in the like a fly in a web, time to shut the trap for good." The plan was daring and risky. The Third Army would swing northwest and link with First Army advancing from the north. This would form a pocket trapping 3 German armies, but to do so they had to cover another 40 through difficult terrain against desperate German defense, all in the dead of winter with temperatures plunging to -20°C, sir, said Major General, commander of Corps. What if the Germans manage to retreat? They won't, smiled. Won't let them, he'll order them to hold to the last, and that will be his last mistake. On December 29th, Operation Thunderbolt began. 3 corps of the Third Army struck northwest. The 4th Armored pushed toward Bastogne. The 6th Armored attacked Warden. The 11th Armored advanced on. German resistance was desperate but disorganized. Their scattered divisions couldn't support one another. The Americans used their mobility, striking where the enemy was weakest. By the end of the day, the bulge had shrunk by another 15. German losses over 8,000 men and 150 tanks. American losses 890 men and 23 tanks. On January 1, 1945, received an intelligence report that intrigued him. The Germans had deployed a battalion of heavy tanks, 14 King Tigers, the most powerful tanks in the world. These 70-ton monsters, armed with an 88 gun, were practically invulnerable to standard American tanks. A single King Tiger could wipe out an entire company of Shermans without taking damage. Interesting, said to his intelligence chief. So the Germans want to test their toys against us. Let's see how that works out. On January 2nd, King Tigers of the 5001st SS Heavy Tank Battalion entered combat near the village of. Opposing them was the 8th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armored Division, 17 Shermans under Lieutenant Colonel Richardson. On paper, it looked like David versus Goliath. The Sherman weighed 32 tons and mounted a 76 gun effective against King Tiger only at less than 500 m. The King Tiger could kill a Sherman at 2,000 m, but Richardson was a veteran of the African campaign. He knew in tank battles, the winner is not the one with the better tank, but the one with the better tactics. Listen carefully, he told his crews over the radio. We won't fight them head-on, we'll hunt like wolves in a pack, fast, unexpected. Richardson split his battalion into 4 groups of 4 tanks each. One group would draw German fire with a frontal demonstration, the 2nd and 3rd would flank, the 4th would strike from the rear. The battle began at 14:30. The German Tigers, positioned on a hill, methodically destroyed American tanks. In 5 minutes they knocked out 3 Shermans without loss. But then the American tactic worked. While the Germans focused on the frontal group, the flanking group struck their weaker side armor. The side armor was far less resistant than the thick frontal plate. The result stunned even the Americans. In 40 minutes, they destroyed 8 King Tigers while losing 6 Shermans. Cost ratio was staggering. 1 King Tiger was worth 5 Shermans. Most importantly, it was a crushing psychological blow. The Germans' most powerful weapon was not invincible after all. The Americans proved that even technical superiority doesn't save you if the enemy outthinks you. SS Puffer, commander of the 5001st Battalion, radioed, "The Americans fight completely differently now. They are smarter, faster, bolder. Our Tigers were beaten not by machines but by tactics." On January 3rd, personally inspected the wrecks. Walking among the smoldering hulks of King Tigers, he uttered the phrase that became famous: "It doesn't matter how big and powerful your tank is. What matters is who sits inside." On January 8th, 1945, finally made the hardest decision of his military career. He authorized a retreat from the 22 days of bloody fighting had shown that Germany's last gamble had failed. But the German retreat was no less dramatic than the offensive, under constant attacks by American aircraft and artillery trudging along icy roads, abandoning equipment and severely wounded men. 3 German armies struggled back toward the freed line, had no intention of letting the Germans withdraw peacefully. They came as uninvited guests, he said, now let them pay for it, on January 9th. Through 10th, the Third Army struck at retreating German columns. American aircraft operated day and night, turning German marches into bloody nightmares. Major Angel of the 12th SS Panzer Division wrote in his diary, "This isn't a retreat, it's a rout. Wrecked vehicles everywhere, bodies everywhere. American planes hunt us like rabbits. Discipline is collapsing." On January 16th, the spearheads of the U.S. 3rd and 1st Armies met near. The Bulge was eliminated. The Battle of the ended in complete Allied victory. The results were catastrophic for Germany. The loss: 67,000 men killed, wounded, or captured, 700 tanks and assault guns, and 1,600 aircraft. These had been the Reich's last strategic reserves. American losses were 19,000 men and 733 tanks, but unlike the Germans, the U.S. could replace such losses in a matter of weeks. Field Marshal, assessing the outcome of the battle, uttered the phrase that became the of the Third Reich: "After the, we have no resources left for strategic operations. From now on, we can only retreat and await the end." But the worst blow for Germany was not material but moral. Their final attempt to change the course of the war had collapsed with a crash. Soldiers who in December still believed in possible victory now knew the war was lost for good. By contrast, was at the peak of glory. In 26 days of fighting, his Third Army had marched 150, destroyed 4 German divisions, and liberated dozens of towns. On January 16th, Eisenhower personally visited the Third Army headquarters to congratulate George. He said, "What you did in that will go down in history as one of the greatest feats of the U.S. Armed Forces." When the Battle of the ended, it was time to take stock and analyze the mistakes. Why did Germany's last gamble fail so catastrophically? Why were armies that had once triumphed on every front now powerless against the Americans? Chief error of German command was underestimating the enemy. The accustomed to victories from 1939 through 1942, failed to realize that the U.S. Army of 1944 was fundamentally different from the of 1942 through 43. Major General Strong, Eisenhower's chief intelligence officer, conducted a detailed analysis of German planning for Operation Mr. His conclusions were striking. The Germans planned this operation using the logic of 1940. They expected the Americans to panic and retreat like the French had 4 years earlier, but the Americans of 1944 were entirely different soldiers. Indeed, in 2 years of war, the U.S. Army had developed enormously. Officers had gained experience in Africa, Italy, and Normandy. Soldiers had learned to fight as well as the Germans. American technology and logistics had reached unmatched levels of efficiency. The Germans also underestimated the nature of the Americans themselves. Unlike Europeans, long accustomed to rigid hierarchy, Americans were used to initiative and independence. When a commander was killed, a sergeant took command. When the sergeant fell, a private stepped up. This trait proved decisive in the chaos of the German soldiers cut off from their command often lost the will to fight. Americans in the same situation only fought harder. American technological superiority also played a crucial role. By 1944, U.S. industry was at its peak. A lost tank could be replaced within hours, a downed plane within a day, a fallen pilot within a week. The Germans, in contrast, were fighting at the limits of their resources. Each Tiger tank lost was irreplaceable. Each Me-262 shot down was a catastrophe. Experienced pilots and tank crews were worth their weight in gold, but's greatest mistake was his strategic delusion. He planned this offensive as a turning point that would force the Western Allies into a separate peace. With Germany, this was pure illusion. By the end of 1944, the Allies already saw the end of the war approaching and were preparing for post-war settlements. No tactical setback could persuade them to compromise with the Nazi regime. General Bradley, a commander of the U.S. 12th Army Group, put it bluntly, lived in a world of illusions. He thought we were like the French in 1940, but we didn't come for glory or territory. We came to destroy Nazism forever. The Germans also miscalculated the psychological factor. The massacre where SS troops executed American prisoners only hardened Allied resolve. Instead of fear and hesitation, it gave the Americans new motivation to fight to the finish. Sergeant Kurt of the 285th Infantry Regiment wrote in his diary, "When we heard about the mood in the companies changed overnight. Before we saw the Germans as ordinary soldiers following Orders, now we saw them as murderers who had to be destroyed. Operation Mr. Rain revealed another fatal weakness of German strategy: total dependence on the himself, personally planned. The operation personally appointed commanders and personally forbade retreat, even when situations became hopeless. A system built on the cult of one man proved fatally fragile. When the decisions were wrong, they could not be corrected. No one dared oppose the greatest commander of all time. American command system, in contrast, rested on collegiality and professionalism. Eisenhower consulted his subordinates, listened to his staff. Division commanders had freedom of initiative. The result was inevitable. A flexible American system defeated a rigid German hierarchy. To fully grasp the scale of the American victory it's worth analyzing in detail what achieved. With his Third Army, military historians regard this operation as one of the greatest examples of operational art in the 20th century. First, demonstrated unmatched speed of reaction. From Eisenhower's phone call to the launch of the attack, only 72 hours passed. In that time, the Third Army pivoted its entire front by 90 degrees and marched 150. For comparison, the Germans needed at least a week to redeploy a single army, and the Soviets about 10 days did it in 3. The secret lay in extraordinary logistical organization. Colonel Walter, chief of movement for the Third Army, designed a system that allowed massive troop movements with minimal traffic jams or delays. Each division had a detailed march route timed to the minute. Each column knew where and when to refuel. Every commander had clear contingency instructions. Logistics is the art of the possible, said. And we made the impossible possible. Second, showed mastery in the tactical use of different arms. His armored divisions acted not as blunt iron fists, but as surgical scalpels, slicing through German defenses at their weakest points. Instead of frontal assaults, used flanking maneuvers. Instead of long artillery, he relied on sudden strikes supported by attack aircraft. Instead of cautious advances, he launched rapid breakthroughs with immediate exploitation. Fought outside the rules, said Lieutenant General Fritz, commander of Panzer Division. When we expected him to strike from the front, he hit from the flank. When we prepared for a flank attack, he struck from the rear. Third, displayed unique ability to exert psychological pressure on the enemy. His Third Army didn't just advance, it created an atmosphere of inevitable German defeat. Fast breakthroughs, sweeping flanks, sudden blows to the rear, all of it eroded German confidence. Many units surrendered before firing a shot. Didn't just fight our soldiers, Field Marshal Model later wrote in his memoirs. He fought our spirit, and in that fight we lost. Fourth, the American general showed rare talent in coordinating multiple armies. His counterattack required close cooperation between Third Army, First Army, and Simpson's Ninth Army. Didn't merely execute his assigned role, he actively shaped the actions of neighboring forces. His initiative spurred other commanders to act, creating an avalanche effect. Wasn't just an army commander, Eisenhower assessed, he was a catalyst that accelerated everything around him. Finally, revealed an uncommon instinct for seizing the initiative in the harshest conditions. When the Germans attacked in the most American commanders thought of defense, immediately began planning a counterattack. This mindset, always seeking opportunities to strike, made a unique military leader. He didn't react to the enemy's moves, he forced the enemy to react to his. The Battle of the ended nearly 80 years ago, yet its lessons remain relevant today. The operation stands both as a textbook on how not to plan strategic offensives and as a model for how to respond to crisis. Lesson 1. Underestimating the enemy always leads to disaster. German planners based Operation Rain on outdated views of the U.S. Army, ignoring how much it had changed in 2 years of war. Modern conflicts prove this lesson still holds. Armies that fail to adapt to new realities are doomed, no matter their past victories. Lesson 2. Speed of reaction. Crisis often matters more than perfect planning. Lacked time for meticulous preparation, but he had decisiveness and improvisation. In today's even faster wars battlefield, conditions can change in hours. Commanders who waste time on bureaucracy will lose to those who act quickly and boldly. Lesson 3. The psychological factor is as vital as material strength. The Germans had enough force for success in them, but after their first setbacks they lost faith. Americans, even in their darkest hour, kept confidence. That resilience let them withstand the blow and seized the initiative. Lesson 4. A flexible command system is essential. Germany's rigid hierarchy, with making every decision, failed in a dynamic situation. The the American system built on delegated authority and initiative let commanders adapt quickly. Lesson 5: Logistics is critical. The German offensive collapsed largely due to lack of fuel and ammunition. The Americans, by contrast, had virtually unlimited supplies. In modern conflicts, supply chains are even more complex. An army that can't sustain itself will lose regardless of soldiers' heroism. Lesson 6: Technological superiority matters. By 1944, U.S. Bella's advantage lay not only in weapon quality but in mass production and effective use. Lesson 7: Strategic maturity of leadership is decisive. The Americans saw war as more than battles. It was about destroying Nazi ideology. This vision allowed them to maintain coalition unity even in crisis and fight through to victory. That was Germany's last great attempt to alter the war's course. Its failure meant the fate of the Third Reich was sealed. The road to Berlin lay open. When the last fighting in the ended in January 1945, it was clear the world had changed forever. The operation that was supposed to bring Germany a second Dunkirk had become its final disaster. The irony was that German mockery of the Americans became the catalyst for their own defeat. Contempt for the enemy, belief in their own superiority, dismissal of American capabilities, all this led to strategic blindness. On December 16, 1944, SS Gruppen had real reason for optimism. His divisions broke through American defenses, thousands of enemy soldiers surrendered, and the road to Antwerp seemed open. But by December 22, that same was desperately trying to save what remained of his army. Thus, American merchants had proved such formidable warriors that even elite SS units could not withstand them. What had happened in those 6 days? How did an army retreating in panic seize the initiative and strike a devastating counterblow? The answer: the Germans fought against outdated perceptions, not reality. Their image of the U.S. Army was 2 years out of date. In that time, the Americans had gone from raw to professional soldiers. More importantly, the Americans proved principle in modern war. Victory goes not to those with the proudest traditions, but to those who adapt fastest to new conditions. The German army, burdened with immense historical experience, proved too conservative. American army, free of dogma and stereotypes, developed new approaches to combat, became the symbol of this new American philosophy of war. His Third Army fought not by academy canon, but by the logic of effectiveness. The goal was results, not adherence to tradition. I'm not fighting German generals said, I'm fighting German soldiers, and my soldiers are better than theirs. This philosophy proved victorious. In 3 weeks of fighting the Americans not only repelled the German offensive, they showcased a new model of warfare that became the standard for future conflicts: speed, flexibility, technological superiority, mastery of logistics, and psychological impact. The enemy, all these elements were united for the first time in one system. In the Germans, by contrast, revealed the danger of clinging to past glories. Blitzkrieg, so effective in 1939 through 41, failed against an enemy that had learned how to counter it. Operation Mr. Rain became the swan song of the old European school of war. After it was clear the future belonged to those who changed quickly and dared to experiment. The American victory in had immense symbolic weight. It proved to the world that the United States was not only an industrial giant but also a great military power. The European balance of power was changed forever. The era when Europe's armies decided the continent's fate had ended. The American era had begun, and it continues still. Battle of the ended nearly 8 decades ago, yet its echo still resounds. It was not merely a military victory but a symbol of an epochal shift, the transition from the old world to the new. On the morning of December 16, 1944, when German guns thundered through the forest, few could have foreseen that this operation would be Europe's last bid to keep its dominance. Germany, heired to centuries of military tradition, wagered everything it had left. Facing it stood the young American army, a force from a country that only 40 years earlier had fought native tribes, but now laid claim to global leadership. The result shocked everyone, including the Americans themselves. In 26 days of combat, it became clear the future belonged not to those with the longest history, but to those who learned and adapted fastest. And his soldiers revealed a new understanding of war. For them, war was not an art but a technology, not ritual but process, not a display of national spirits but a means to achieve concrete goals. This pragmatic philosophy proved stronger than romantic visions of glory. The Americans fought not to prove superiority but to finish the war quickly and go home. Paradoxically, that unpoetic motivation made them unstoppable. While Germans dreamed of grand victories, Americans methodically dismantled the German war machine piece by piece. German jokes about American merchants turned out prophetic in an unexpected way. Americans did approach war like merchants with calculation, planning, attention to detail, and a drive for maximum efficiency. The result speaks for itself. The merchants crushed the warriors, technology beat tradition, the future outplayed the past. The battle of that became a moment of truth for Western civilization. It showed leadership passing from the old world to the new, from Europe to America, from aristocracy to democracy. This transition was inevitable, but it found dramatic completion when the last German tanks rolled back toward the line. An entire era rolled back with them. A new era had begun, the American era, the age when world politics was shaped by a nation whose soldiers only yesterday seemed to Europeans like untested amateurs. The irony was that the Germans themselves hastened the process. Their Operation Demine was meant to restore German leadership in Europe. Instead, it handed that leadership to America forever. Looking back at those dramatic days of winter 1944 to 45, one sees that they determined not just the outcome of World War II but the shape of the century that followed, and his men did more than defeat the German army. They unveiled a new way of thinking, a new culture of warfare, new method of solving global problems. That legacy endures today. Modern conflicts still echo the principles first applied by Americans in the speed, technological edge, logistical precision, psychological impact. The battle of the changed the face of war forever, and that is its enduring lesson. Was this lesson good for humanity? History has yet to answer, but one thing is beyond doubt. In December 1944, in the forests, a new world was born, a world we still live in today.